Welcome back to The Lead. I'm Jake Tapper. Continuing now our national lead. The protests over the George Zimmerman verdict have been overall peaceful, with some exceptions. But online, some particularly violent threats have been made against Zimmerman. His brother and defense attorney described the life awaiting and who was found not guilty of murder.
The threats are vile, they're vicious, they're disgusting, and they are sometimes in person, like people wearing shirts with my brother's face on it in crosshairs or encouraging others to act out violently against him.
I think he has to live mostly in hiding. He's got to be able to protect himself from that periphery that still believe that he's some racist murderer.
Jose Baez knows the difficulties in representing a controversial client in a very public trial. He represented Casey Anthony, who did murder of her young daughter Kaylee 2 years ago. Jose, thanks for joining us. You just heard from Zimmerman's attorney and brother. Zimmerman is facing what his brother describes as vile threats, with his attorney saying he'll likely need to stay in hiding. You know this well from your former client, Casey Anthony. Talk us through what you think are the big, legitimate safety concerns for Zimmerman right now.
Well, I think the attorneys involved probably have the better idea as to whether there are any legitimate threats. I mean, let's face it, when it comes to the online blogosphere, suddenly someone gets a computer and gets a set of cojones with them. It's one of those things where you have situations where people decide to vent their frustrations online, but of course they wouldn't act out personally. Now, as to the encouragement that's going on there, there's always someone out there that's unstable, and those are the ones you worry about.
I know you're not comfortable talking about things that you directly told Casey Anthony in terms of advice to her, but if you were George Zimmerman's attorney, what kind of advice would you give to him right now in terms of safety? Would you tell him to move to another state? Would you suggest that he not give any interviews? What would you tell him?
Well, you know, first and foremost, George has got to decide how he's going to have to live the rest of his life. Now, fortunately for George, he has a certain demographic that believes in his innocence and has supported him. In fact, his entire defense was funded by private donations. So you have a situation where there seems to be a split. A certain demographic supports him, others don't. So he's going to have to, one, find out what he can do financially first and utilize that demographic which helps him. So I think that's what's going to take a priority, because in order to ride off into the sunset, you're going to have a little bank to do it.
I want to play something you said in your press conference after Casey Anthony was acquitted in 2011 in the murder of her 2-year-old daughter, Kaylee. Let's play that.
While we're happy for Casey, there are no winners in this case. Kaylee has passed on far, far too soon. And what my driving force has been for the last 3 years has been always to make sure that there has been justice for Kaylee and Casey.
That's a very different situation. But Zimmerman's defense team was criticized by some for spiking the football on Saturday night, for not talking about the loss of the life of Trayvon Martin. Talk, if you would, about the difficult balance between defending your client and also being mindful of the fact that there is a loss of life.
Right. Well, first off, different lawyers handle things differently. They may have felt that that's the way they wanted to be portrayed. You know, when you give that conference, that press conference, you know, it's very spontaneous, and it's what you're feeling and what you're going through at the time. So they wanted to pay themselves. That's the way they proceeded. Now, what people forget is that these are tragedies from the very beginning. And what a lot of people do, they see this on TV, they think it's entertainment, and many people take it up like a sport, and they root for one side, and they get happy when there's a victory for that side, as if it were a sporting event. But, you know, everyone has to remember, this is a tragedy. Trayvon Martin will never graduate from high school. His folks won't see him walk in graduation. He'll never be able to get married. He'll never be able to have a son or a daughter and look at them in the eye and watch grow. And his life, you know, he was cut off. His life was ended far, far too soon. And people need to remember that, and I'm sure the defense lawyers know that, and I'm sure they're cognizant of that. But at the same time, their role in the process was to defend Mr. Zimmerman. So sometimes you get caught up in that process.
All right, Jose Baez, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. Coming up, the sensitive data he's leaked may be nothing compared to what he's still sitting on. We'll talk to the reporter who's become Edward Snowden's confidant about the documents that could bring the NSA to its knees.